Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Medhurst. I'm joined today by Brazilian journalist and a good friend of the show, Pepe Escobar. Pepe has worked as a reporter across several continents for several decades. He's got an excellent, unique focus on Eurasia, and he is an editor at large at the Asia Times, and he also writes for The Cradle.
Not anymore.
Not anymore? Fill us in,
That's
Pepe.
a long story.
Okay. Well, he was, and he did great work there. And he still does.
It's complicated, Richard. It's complicated, but it's. I have to start telling everybody. I left two and a half years ago, and we are at war still. So and
still,
it doesn't look,
okay.
And it doesn't look good.
Well, in any case, I won't let that dampen your grand introduction. So I think we should start with the crash test dummy. What do you think, Joe Biden? I mean, what a disaster. Well, we've had like an attempted assassination, and then we've had Joe Biden dropping out. Do you think he did it, or it was his handlers?
Well, Richard, we should have 1 hour just to get into the details of it. No, I'm not joking. Just to get into the details of what happened between a Saturday and a Sunday, basically 1 week, right? You start with the assassination of a presidential candidate, assassination attempt against a presidential candidate. The whole thing about the Secret Service, which was so absurd that obviously it had to culminate into that absolutely incompetent woman resigning. There was more than all.
Could I just interrupt there just 1 second? Because I wanted to say this. I asked a friend of mine, someone who works close protection. I'm not going to name, say what, but he's, they've done this for decades. And he told me, looking at the reaction, he would have fired the whole team for afterwards. Never mind before. He would have fired the whole team. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, look, we will never know what really happened that day, Richard. Never. It's just like Dallas 1963. It will be open to a Pandora's box of speculation. We will never have a definitive story about what happened. Including people who look. I saw a lot of professional snipers trying to decode by the millimeter what happened, and I also saw some other people saying it was a fake. So we will never know. In fact, let's put it under this rubric. Yes, it's an assassination attempt. Let's consider it an assassination attempt because there were motives for it. It was even telegraphed before, including by toxic Victoria Nuland. Oh, something might happen to him, Well,
I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
And then we had the absolutely crazy week after that, the reverberations of the assassination attempt, and that culminates on a lazy Sunday afternoon. We could even invoke the Kinks song, "Lazing on a Sunny Afternoon." Okay, so we have the Kinks on a lazy sunny Sunday afternoon, and the President of the United States, in a letter posted on X, without the White House letterhead, with a very dodgy signature, without telling his staff, he simply abandons the presidential race in 2024, just like that. Of course, we all know what happened afterwards. It was total dementia in terms of, is it forged? They forced him to do it. Now we know that actually the two main characters behind it were Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donnellan. These were the guys who actually may have redacted the letter and even came up with a signature. And this happened, very interesting. This was on the Sunday. Now, this happened 2 days after the famous blue screen of death day.
Oh, God.
I was in Hong Kong at night at the Mandarin pub discussing with British traders. We were discussing the plenum. I was in Hong Kong basically to follow the plenum of the Chinese Communist Party. From Hong Kong is great because you have the interconnection of opinions from, the hyper-capitalists, the socialism with Chinese characteristics, everything. Hong Kong, as you know, is a mecca of everything. Yeah. And we were there discussing this thing, and they were, and the British traders were saying, "Wow, this is completely crazy." They did this basically to erase some files, and in the end, they are proven correct because it's quite possible that what happened with CrowdStrike, which is very connected to the FBI, was something on purpose to erase files compromising the FBI in all sorts of dossiers related to the possible assassination attempt against Trump. So, okay, this was on a Friday. Then Sunday, the whole thing. And then the next day, we have the chief of staff of the White House, a conference call with everybody at White House staff. Look, we're going to have full control about what's going on. There can be no leaks about what's happening afterwards. Nobody knew what was happening to Biden. The speculation that Biden was already dead, all that. And this lasted for, let's say, 48 hours at least. And then the president resurfaces. He may speak to the nation later on this week. And suddenly we have a brand new candidate for the presidential election. And by magic, in less than 48 hours, the whole Democratic Party says, "Oh, that's her. That's our girl. And she's going to win in November." If we were discussing this in terms of fiction, or people will say, "But you are seriously deranged." But truth, and in this case, half-truths, a series of half-truths, they are much stranger than fiction, in fact, because this is what actually happening. We are in the middle of this gigantic kabuki. Now, in theory, we have Trump against Harris in November, but maybe not, because this could change next month before the Democratic primaries. We have Obama actively campaigning against Kamala Harris. We have a criminal gang war between the Clinton crime family and the Obama gang. So it's Netflix will never come up with something as entertaining as this, right? So this is where amazing, really. We are right in the middle of it, and this is the short version, Richard.
Yeah, that's the short version. Yeah, and I hijacked your term just to rename Biden the crashed test dummy. He's already, they finished with it.
Absolutely.
I want to maybe just talk briefly about Netanyahu, because he just landed in the U.S. and for the first time there's no Secretary of State to greet him. There's no president,
nobody,
vice president. That was embarrassing. And I mean, I don't know why they even host him if they're not going to receive him. I think they didn't think the press would be this bad. What's your opinion?
Well, I'm eagerly waiting for the Trump-Bibi conversation. This is going to be absolutely crucial, because what's going to happen next, let's say within the next less than 3.5 months before the elections, will depend on what Trump is going to tell Bibi. So I think this is, in fact, Biden is ridiculous, because nothing would come out of it if this happened. Maybe they won't even meet. But this thing is directly related to what happened in Beijing earlier this week, which is enormous. It's massive. The Beijing Declaration, 14 Palestinian factions.
Yeah.
Apparently all of them, there are 14. We saw there were 4 or 5. No, 14. They signed the Beijing Declaration. They promised to have a unified Palestinian government. There were observers, very important, from Russia, Turkey, Jordan, if I'm not mistaken, Saudi Arabia. So this is enormous. Once again, China as master peacemaker. Again, which is something
I didn't expect that.
Can you imagine if we were talking about this like only 6 months ago?
Exactly. It looked very difficult. And I mean, it was a miracle when they did Iran and Saudi Arabia. This is also very, very tough nut to crack. Yeah.
It started with Russia, and then Russia, the ball went to Beijing, and Beijing clinched the deal, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Very, very important. Now the Beijing Declaration, and you know what happened in the last few hours. Kuleba goes to Beijing, talks to Yang Yi, and says, we are ready to negotiate.
Yeah, you've foreseen all of my questions, but I'm just going to let you roll through it.
So it's amazing. The capital of diplomacy on the planet is Beijing. Like a few years ago, we all thought it was going to be Astana in Kazakhstan. They were very, very active diplomatic a few years ago. So now the two Eurasian capitals of diplomacy are Moscow and Beijing. And because of the comprehensive strategic partnership, they discuss all of that between them at the highest level before any of this happens. Don't forget that there was a Hamas delegation visiting Moscow a few months ago as well. The Chinese were totally briefed about these conversations. For instance, when I was in Moscow last month, there were 2 Yemeni delegations visiting Moscow. So there's going to be reverberations of that as well. And of course, the Chinese position in terms of being the peacemaker, first of all, unifying Palestine. And then the next step is the possible steps towards Palestinian independence, Palestinian sovereignty, and a sovereign Palestinian state. But this is already ongoing, and not only from the part of China, from the part of Russia-China. This is a Russia-China joint effort, in fact. And we can also say, extrapolating a little bit, that this should become a BRICS effort. Because Iran and Saudi Arabia being in BRICS, and the fact that Russia is accommodating Iran and Saudi Arabia, Russia is the main interlocutor between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and also they exchange this information with the Chinese. They want to bring a resolution of the Palestinian tragedy to BRICS as a whole. So this will be a multilateral power trying to solve the tragedy. It's enormous. Russia on one side, China on one side, together, and also bringing Iran and Saudi Arabia to the table. This is mega huge. And obviously, it's not exactly what the Americans want. They already said that, you are legitimizing the Hamas terrorists. Totally predictable now because they are so childish. And obviously, Bibi is fuming with all that.
It's amazing watching it on a diplomatic level because I think we can all see the military developments and how big they are, but not much credit, or not enough credit, I should say, is given to the diplomatic upheavals that are going on. Really seismic shift, yes. Unbelievable, truly. Pepe, I just saw an hour ago, Hezbollah released the 3rd episode of their Hoopo, their Hudhud drone, filming this Ramit David airbase in near Haifa that the Israelis have. Well, give me your thoughts on Hezbollah's surveillance drones and Yemen going into Tel Aviv twice on the same day. I mean, this is unbelievable.
It is. Yemen is absolutely incredible. I didn't have discussion in Moscow on the military angle. Our conversations were geoeconomic. For instance, one of these delegations, they were trying very hard to get a meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture in Moscow to propose Hodeida Russian ports direct connectivity corridor.
Wow.
They want to export Yemeni products, and they have excellent stuff, including that marvelous coffee,
Yeah.
And they need grain, and the famine in Yemen is still there. They painted an apocalyptic scenario. I was very, very sad to hear that it is as serious as it was 2 or 3 years ago, you know. And now they are fighting two wars. They're essentially fighting the Anglo-Americans, and they are also fighting a renewal of, let's say, Saudi belligerence, which, well, you can never trust those people in Riyadh. You know that very well. We all know that they are untrustworthy. Apparently, they are trying to come up with some sort of understanding that, look, you're not going to blockade our bank. You're not going to blockade our ports again. You cannot blockade Sana'a airport. Let's try to find an. Apparently, they are discussing again after the Saudis threatened to block everything.
Yeah,
you know, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago or so. But it's still a war on two fronts, and they still manage to organize themselves military, to keep inventing new drones and new missiles, originals, not stuff that they are buying from Iran or stuff that they would buy from Russia. No, developed originally. And of course, their strategy of we control the Bab el-Mandeb and we control the Red Sea, our friends go through, and everything related to Israel doesn't.
I love it.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And Richard, we all know how this is seen all across the lands of Islam and all across the global majority. The Houthis are now pop stars all over the world. Resistance pop stars, you know. They are admired from, Patagonia to Somalia to Nigeria to Laos. It's absolutely amazing with one strategic move. That's all it takes. But of course, very well thought, very well organized, discriminating between friends and foes with a clear humanitarian purpose. In the words of their prime minister, in fact, we are defending our people. So spiritually, humanistically, this is something amazing. And they are the ones who are doing something tangible and practical to defend Palestine. And in many aspects, much more than the other actors in the axis of resistance. Of course, everybody is doing their part. But Yemen, especially, it's on a whole new level, right?
It is. I think they also embarrassed, all these other Arab countries that could be doing something. Morocco, is on the Strait of Gibraltar. Oman, Oman is not bad in terms of Gulf countries.
Oman, at least they are discreet.
Yes.
Let's put it.
Let's put it that way. But I just wanted to make the point they have the Strait of Hormuz, which is a strategic, asset. At least Iran is on the other side. But the Suez Canal, what excuse did the Egyptians have not to shut it this time? So I think the Yemenis kind of took over that 1956 Arab nationalist role and just said, okay, you're not coming through as long as you're behaving like this. And it surprised everyone. I really surprised everyone.
And the Suez Canal is more or less condemned in the long run, right, Richard? Because with the international north-south transportation corridor, I would say within the next 3, 4, 5 years, everybody will be using it. Russia via the Caspian, Iran, and then Indian Ocean all the way to India. And 3 BRICS on top of it. So the other BRICS will also start using it as well. So I would say the BRICS SCO universe will adopt the international north-south transportation corridor and abandon navigation through Suez. So once again, this block division is more or less inevitable. The empire and the vassals on one side, and Eurasia, and everything connected to Eurasia or Afro-Eurasia on the other side.
Do you see that China and Iran, they just opened a direct freight railway? So basically, not only does it mitigate any the whole Eurasian thing, it helps because it's all based on land. So all the sea powers, traditional sea powers, Britain and
it's in the. You're right. It's all across the heartland. Of course, the They go through the rimland as well via the Chinese Maritime Silk Road. And of course, don't forget the Northern Silk Road with all those powerful nuclear icebreakers, the Russian nuclear icebreakers. In less than 2 years, this is going to be enormous. I was discussing this in St. Petersburg at the St. Petersburg Forum. It was fascinating. One of the best sessions at the forum was about the Northern Silk Road, and everybody important in Russia was there. Heads of local governments, the mayor of Murmansk, the guys from Rosatom, everybody was there. And they say, look, there's a lot of challenges, lots of investment needed, but the federal government is, they're putting all the money that we need. And in a matter of a few years, this is going to be enormous. It's going to be the Northern Maritime Silk Road, complementing the Southern Maritime Silk Road used by the Belt and Road Initiative, right? And with the International North-South Transportation Corridor diagonally. It's amazing. You're going to have 3 major transportation corridors, 1 overland and 2 maritime. And of course, this stranglehold that the Americans have on lines of communication, maritime lines of communication will be over. And this is one of the big developments in the rest of this decade, and it's going to happen still in this decade.
You just reminded me of something, Pepe. There was talk a few months ago that the Yemenis were going to cut the internet cables in the sea. I don't know if that's true or if it was just a rumor. It's very, very daring and smart if they were to do that. I mean, it would be absolutely wild. But do you think there's any truth to it? Is that something that anyone would do?
Russia, Yemen?
No, just Yemen, because you have these internet cables that pass also, in the.
No.
They're underwater. They lay these giant internet cables.
Attacking the cables.
Yeah. They were saying that. They're going to do that.
I read something about that. I talked to somebody about. No way. No, it's not in their strategic interest to do something like this.
Yeah, I figured everyone would be quite angry at that. I wouldn't really. But
strategically, what's the game?
Right?
No, they think strategically. This is something that is extraordinary. They think strategically in military terms, and they think strategically in geoeconomic terms as well. This delegation that was in Moscow, wow, there was a guy from their agriculture minister. They are very well prepared. They know everything that's happening everywhere. They have solutions. They need help. And they are, I can be a little blunt now. They are not getting as much help as they need.
Yeah.
From Russia, China, and Iran. Economic.
Okay, really? So even the closest allies, that you think that they're not doing enough, they should be doing more?
No, they should be doing more. But it's complicated, Richard, because in the case of Russia needs to keep very good relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. And the Russians know everything about Saudi Arabia and Yemen. They cannot be overtly pro-government in Sana'a. And we should not forget that actually there is another government in Yemen, right, which is theoretically in Yemen, but it's not. It's in a bloody 5-star hotel in Riyadh.
Yeah, the hotel dwellers.
Exactly. So the Russians are very cautious in how to deal with that. So they go, it's incremental, little by little. But this is something, I had this discussion in Moscow. And I said, guys, you need to be more proactive. There are people dying of hunger in Yemen. You could help with that. You could establish, for instance, start using the Hodeida port. And this was before Hodeida port was bombed by the Israelis. Now, and I got an email 2 days ago, said, yes, it's more or less back to normal, but it's terrible because it's going to cost us a lot of money to rebuild what was destroyed, warehouses, refinery, etc. And they don't have that.
They
need help.
Yeah, I remember I did this investigation with this Yemeni economist. I mean, he's in Yemen, and he approached me, and we put together all these things, and all the figures for official ones. We took like World Bank and IMF just to take the most conservative ones that are publicly available, and it's a disaster. I mean, like this scandal with how they divert the fuel ships, and then they would keep them, and despite having UN permission to go to Hodeidah, and then they take them to Aden instead, and then have the trucks drive around the whole country. Exactly. Yeah, just by the time they get there, the fuel is twice the price, and then it's like a spiral. And I'm guessing this. I mean, I know the situation hasn't changed much, and also the other problem is the food, right, which you highlighted. So I agree with you. I think they should be doing more to help them from Iran, Russia, China. But I guess they also have to balance things, like you said. It's easier said than done.
Yes, and this geopolitical equilibrium between Iran and Saudi Arabia is very tricky. And the ones who know how to pull that off are the Russians.
Yeah.
And they are cautious. They are very good, but they are cautious, But sooner or later, it will become obvious to them that they need to help Yemen and the Chinese as well, because Yemen for the Chinese strategically is extremely important. And do you know that they want to get into BRICS, Richard?
Yemen, you're talking about, of course. Yeah, I mean, they really have their heads screwed on right. They understand everything, and
they understand everything. They understand everything, exactly. So it's going to be very hard for Russia and China to sell this to Saudi Arabia inside BRICS.
Yeah, I want to ask you, because you raised this very interesting point about managing or balancing friendships. Russia, they have good ties with Syria. They also have good ties, or relatively good ties, with the Israelis. And when it comes to the Chinese, they have a lot of investments in Israel, but they're also doing a lot of diplomacy to get the Palestinian factions united. How do they balance these things, both of these countries?
Bon, the Chinese are amazing. Huh? The way they formulate is always with metaphors, with images, numerology. You have to do the 3 so-and-so, and then we have to respect the 6 so-and-so. It's fascinating. So you have to decode what they're actually saying. This was very, very clear last week when I was following the plenum in Beijing. So when there was an enormous paper, which was not the final communique. This was a paper explaining how did they get to the decisions that they were taking at the plenum. And one of the paragraphs was fascinating, because we have to adhere to the 6 essentials. And then they describe the 6 essentials. So if you don't grasp the numerology and the metaphors, you don't understand what they're doing. It's fascinating. But the thing is, they progress incrementally as well. And they have a strategic vision. For instance, the strategic vision of bringing Egypt and Ethiopia to BRICS was essentially Chinese. They were thinking about both sides of the Red Sea. They were thinking about their importance and their presence in that area as well. And they were thinking about Yemen as a second stage. So all that subsect of West Asia, with a strong trade, commercial Chinese presence, investments as well, and of course, expanding their geopolitical reach and tying up with the rest of West Asia, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, etc. They see the whole thing strategically, and they are playing Go at the time, but not a way of playing Go aggressively. They are more or less, okay, this territory is very important, so let's have ways to be around this territory, even if we don't control it. Right. So it's something that only a very sophisticated civilization can organize their thinking and organize their long-term views. And the Russians, of course, they also view the whole thing in a very, very different manner, focusing mostly on the post-Soviet space, but now focusing on the rest of Eurasia because many of their super clients for what they're selling, especially energy, they are all across Eurasia. And the Russia-India relationship, which is stronger and stronger by the day, in fact. And at the same time, they have to be the messengers. For instance, inside the SCO and inside BRICS, the Russians are the messengers between India and China, the appeasers, the messengers, the go-betweens, okay, guys, let's sit down and discuss this. Don't let this get out of hand, etc. They're very good at that kind of stuff. So when you have these two civilization states pooling their resources in terms of thinking strategically, wow, there's no competition in the West. Absolutely not.
With Syria, it's funny because the Russians, they have they have a lot of troops in Syria. They have this base on the Mediterranean, which is very strategic for them. But the critique is always, why don't they stop the Israelis from bombing Damascus? Which is, I think they'd ignite a hefty war if they did. But I also wonder this as well because, like I was saying, Russia has good relations with Syria and with Israel. So it's quite a contradiction.
It's quite a contradiction. I agree with you completely. And this is a question that I have discussed this a lot with a lot of people. But when you are in Russia and you see the pull of there is a Zionist lobby, especially in Moscow, very active. There is an enormous banking lobby, and they are Jewish bankers, very powerful. So Putin, of course, he has to navigate all that. And of course, over 1 million, I don't know if they are Russian passport holders or just Russophones, or if they have only an Israeli passport. But I assume that most of them have 2 passports, Israeli and Russian, living all across Israel. So this is extremely sensitive, extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
So we can understand why, but of course, instinctively, we immediately think they cannot allow Israel to do what they're doing in Damascus, Aleppo, whatever, these bombings are literally every month. It is completely absurd. So the problem is nobody gets into Putin's mind to see how he's thinking strategically about that. This is not a Ministry of Defense decision. This is not Gerasimov, Richard.
Yeah.
This decision comes from the big bear up there, and nobody knows why he's not more forceful to send a message to Israel: don't touch Syria.
Yeah, it's weird. I asked Syrian official once, and he told me the Russians, they are, they don't want to start. Basically, they don't have more trouble than what they're already dealing with in the north of Syria.
It's
I
a good
understand
answer
that strategically, but
it's a good answer. It's a good answer. Yes.
Yeah.
And every time that you touch upon this in Moscow, Richard, they say, look, over there is not our war. Over there means West Asia as a whole. Syria, Hezbollah, even Palestine. We have a war on our borders.
Mm-hmm.
This is which is absolutely correct.
Yeah. In addition,
there's
now they
no
have
question.
Yeah.
They have a war priority. And this is this war is existential for them. This is NATO on their borders. That's a completely different ballgame,
Yeah, the other thing though I think about is they need Syria for the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, and the maritime connection.
Yes.
So it's in everybody's benefit. It's in the Chinese, in the Iranians, in the Russians' benefit to stop the Israelis bombing the infrastructure because they've struck the Latakia port. But yeah, Let's switch to Ukraine because I mean,
Oh, shit. Can I ask you a question, Richard?
Yeah.
What do you think Erdogan and Assad are going to discuss if they meet next month?
Well, I know that they won't meet unless Erdogan commits to, withdrawing the troops in the north. That's number one. If they meet, I mean, I think they're going to be discussing how to address the Kurds because they, for Syria, they have the issue with Kurds controlling all the petrol, all the oil fields, and working with the Americans. And then on the Turkish side, even though they're allied with the Americans, they don't want to have, for them, the Kurdish Workers' Party is a terrorist organization. So I think they're going to be trying to discuss how to, do a pincer move on them, and that's going to upset the Americans. I think that's number one. And then the other one is also maybe about economic, reestablishing economic ties, having trade going through properly. So those two things come to mind, and also, regional things. So of course, Palestine, Iran, Lebanon. Yeah, that's those things come to mind. Did I miss anything?
No, you did not. I am particularly fascinated by, there seems to be a slight tilt, at least in Erdogan's mind.
Yeah.
He's looking at Eurasia and say, if I don't do anything now, I'm going to be completely excluded.
Right.
So I see he's finally getting the picture. You could see that at the SCO summit in Astana. The fact that he wants to be part of BRICS as well. He's going to come to the BRICS summit in Kazan as a guest. He's going to be invited as well. And so he's looking around Eurasia and say, yes, if I don't do anything, I'm going to be the odd man out.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because when we were talking about countries who have to manage two enemies, who their friendships with, I was thinking actually of Turkey, because they're good with Iran, but they're also a NATO country. And same thing with Russia. They have good ties with Russia, but they're also, they're still a NATO country at the end of the day. So, yeah.
And there's another fascinating extra angle, Richard. The Organization of Turkic States, which theoretically is the way that Erdogan found a way to get a strong, in theory, Turkic presence in Central Asia. But it's we had a discussion in Moscow last month. There was a round table. It was fascinating. There were people from Georgia, from Azerbaijan, from Kazakhstan as well, and we were all discussing the Organization of Turkic States. And the consensus is that they don't know exactly what they want, which is something that I confirmed myself. When I went to visit them in Istanbul, they couldn't explain to me exactly what this is all about. It was something completely surrealist, And then when you go to Central Asia, you see Turkish construction companies, especially in Kazakhstan. So then I start thinking about it. Okay, this is basically a real estate speculation thing by those people who support Erdogan in Turkey. Look, can you open up a few extra markets for us because Turkey in crisis, etc.? Can we start building in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, etc.? So this is what it looks like. Yeah, I don't see this as an instrument of really important Turkic presence compared to Russia and China. Central Asia is Russia and China everywhere.
True. Yeah, truly. Absolutely. I mean, landmass, obviously, Kazakhstan is absolutely enormous, but we're talking politically, geostrategically, economically. Yes. Yeah, it's Russia, China, without question. Without question. And Pepe, speaking of Ukraine, I mean, honestly, Ukraine are hardly in the news anymore. For me, the whole war was over.
Disappear.
Yeah, it's like, they dumping all this money there, and it's like, you don't want to talk about your investment. I mean, what happened to the marketing? But I thought the war was over the minute that they had the referendums. The Russians, they built all these magnificent tank traps and dragon's teeth, and they had all these defensive. I mean, they're quite classic, but they just built them very well. You'll never get through them. You need nuclear bombs to get through them. I mean, it's It's over, in my opinion. I don't know what you think.
Yes. Well, I am a little bit. This month, I've been concentrating on ASEAN and China. I like to do these stretches, dig deep into different parts of Eurasia. So I'll be back in Russia in 1 month from now. I'm sure the frame of mind is going to be very different compared to a month ago. Because including this extremely important detail of Kuleba talking to Wang Yi and say, look, we're ready to negotiate. They're starting to get the real picture.
Man, when I saw that a few hours ago, I was like, thank God Pepe is coming on. We got it at the right time.
So this is going to change. But of course, on the terrain is brutal. It's brutal. There is a characteristic Russian offensive, attritional war, of course, but massive. They destroy whole brigades every day, whole regiments. This is completely nuts. And that artillery barrage is something really apocalyptic.
Right.
But it's the Russian way. Now they conquer one village, and then 4 days later, another village. It's snail pace. This could go on another century. Goes on like this. But you can see that even if it's not an offensive, they are progressing all along the front line. So obviously, considering that Kiev has no idea of what they're going to get until the end of this year in terms of finance and new weapons, apart from F-16s, which are going to be incinerated anyway, wherever they are.
Yeah.
The fact that disappeared completely from the news cycle, it's a non-existent war for at least the past 2 weeks or so, will continue to be so. With Trump, they know if Trump is elected, things are going to change. It's not going to be a priority anymore. So that explains Kuleba with Wang Yi. Yeah, but the thing is, what are they going to negotiate? They have nothing to negotiate. The only negotiation is what the Russians have been saying over and over again, especially before and immediately after the NATO summit. Look, you have our list of demands. If you don't follow it, the next list is not going to be generous. It's going to be really hardcore. So take this one, which is extremely generous. So that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm not, we all know NATO will never accept it. But NATO, have you noticed, Richard, that NATO also disappeared from the news cycle?
Yeah.
For the past 2 weeks?
I mean,
completely.
Biden
This proves that NATO is not important.
Biden also not being able to speak destroyed their whole look that they wanted to do a few weeks ago. That was worse.
Destroyed the whole thing. So this proves once again that NATO is just a bunch of lowly vassals.
Yeah.
So the real negotiation is, if there is a real negotiation, it will happen, of course, only after the American election. So we still have less than 3.5 months before we can have the beginning of a negotiation. If it's Trump, he already has a team. They have a plan. I read some of the proposals. It's ridiculous. The Russians are going to laugh about it, but at least it'll be a beginning. At least we're going to have them on the same table. If it's Karma, Kamala, or anybody else on the Democrat, obviously we know there won't be any negotiations. So we are in a lull for the next 3 months. Now, nothing's going to happen apart from this snail pace advance, meat grinder Russian style, little by little, devastating. Or this is not going to happen. This is not going to.
Yeah, I mean, politically, because all of the NATO power emanates from Washington. You would think that now is actually the best time to or shall we say extract concessions from NATO, because they're leaderless in America right now. But the thing is, there's elections coming up and you don't know who you're going to be dealing with afterwards. They just change policies.
You're right, Richard. That's the problem. There's nobody to talk to at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Russians already played their move. They have their list. Okay, follow our list, and we sit down now to discuss with you. You don't want it, no problem. Next time it's not going to be generous. Everybody knows that's the way it is. But on the other side, there's nobody to talk to, literally.
Yeah.
And even if let's see the if in the next few days, Kamala, the crash test dummy, resigns. Because basically he cannot even read a piece of paper. And then we have President Kamala. Do you think Kamala is prepared to have a negotiation with the Russians? She cannot negotiate a hot dog stand. Can you imagine negotiating with the Russians?
She's worse than the Germans.
She's worse. I prefer the hot dog guy. Those hot dog guys in New York City, they are much more competent. You know?
Yeah, no, really. I mean, she the things she said, well, if she said anything, she was barely president the last 4 years. Dick Cheney was running everything when he was vice president.
Exactly. And her policy was the non-policy at the borders. No?
Yeah, that was it.
And she was in charge of the borders. And we all know what happened.
I mean, what a screw up. I think this is another such an obvious picture of the American empire just crumbling really in real time. I didn't think we'd see it so soon, but yeah.
None of us, Richard, none of us anywhere could ever imagine that we'll be actually watching all that live in real time. Just like none of us would imagine that we'll be watching a genocide live in real time in the 21st century.
That's true. That's true.
So this is the year of the total impossibilities happening, and now they're happening simultaneously on top of it.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I say this, you know, obviously I say this both in a good and a bad way because of the reasons you outlined, but in the end we're witnessing extremely seismic you know, political times. I don't think we've seen anything like this in 100 years or more. I mean, not in our lifetimes.
Xi Jinping told Putin last year in Moscow, you remember?
Yes.
When they said their goodbyes in front of the limo outside of the Kremlin, we are seeing changes that haven't happened in 100 years.
Right.
So Xi already knew. And obviously Putin already knew. Why? Because their strategic partnership left the empire completely discombobulated. Completely. These people who theoretically do policy in DC, they will never expect to be fighting the ultimate nightmare, which is an alliance of peer competitors at the highest level. They never expect it to happen. And now it's right in front of them, and they never had a plan A, B, C, nothing, you know.
Do you remember how they were mocking?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yes.
I remember how they were mocking the Russians and saying, "Oh, look, they're getting artillery from North Korea, and they're buying drones from Iran." And these two things are the ones that won them the war in Ukraine. I mean, wow.
There you go. But misinformation and disinformation is Washington is a very provincial town. It's a company town, very provincial. Everybody lives in a bubble. And they simply don't understand the rest of the world. And of course, the mix of hubris, arrogance, and ignorance altogether is lethal. No wonder when things like that happen, and especially at the highest geopolitical, geoeconomic level, they still don't understand. Richard, in Washington, they still don't understand how BRICS and the SCO work. Really, they don't. There you go.
I'm not surprised at all. And speaking of arrogance and being smacked in the face, the French come to mind, and I'm laughing at this pull out from Niger, and now Niger and Burkina Faso, Mali, they've made a confederation. I mean, wow. That was such a humiliating pull out with the ambassador hiding in the embassy and refusing to leave. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, we haven't. And now we have an alliance of the Sahel states, which is just the beginning. Soon they're going to be 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to this, all across the Sahel. We could never imagine that a year ago.
Never.
Absolutely out. The French thought they eternally they will be controlling West Africa. Everybody would be using the French franc. They will be exploiting all the key commodities and industries all across West Africa, and that's it. From one day to another, and not by accident under Le Petit Roi in Paris. But look, from yesterday to today, I was looking at the images of Paris under siege this week.
Yeah,
before the
you
beginning
saw
of
that?
the Olympics, and I was gobsmacked in front of the computer. I said, I can't believe that. Well, it's also my city. I am a resident. I cannot believe they are doing this to our city.
Yeah.
Obviously, everybody left. There are very, very few people, very few Parisians who have to be there because because of work, etc. But everybody else left, and the city is caged completely. A state of exception, like Giorgio Agamben used to theorize about, a state of siege. If you don't have a QR code, you are a non-citizen, and you don't even exist. You cannot go anywhere. Unbelievable. And all that, of course, supervised by Le Petit Roi.
Yeah, and he's refusing to recognize the election results now.
You're right, Richard. It's very important. And he refuses to appoint a prime minister.
Amazing.
They already suggested several prime ministers.
Yeah.
The last one, this woman is not affiliated with any party. Lucy is a very good civil servant, super qualified. Very good with numbers, progressive. No wonder everybody on the left, they agreed, okay, she's our candidate. And obviously, because she already said, look, I am absolutely against Macron's maneuvering with pensions, again, with his pension law. So obviously, Le Petit Roi, he looked at that and I said, no, I cannot. Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
I was interviewing the head of the legal team for the Palestinian Football Association, and we're trying to get the Israelis expelled from the Olympics. And
from the Olympics, right?
Yeah, because they've broken every rule. I mean, if we went through every one, we'd be here all night. But it's amazing how they've done this caged in look that you get in Washington, when Netanyahu visits or when there's inauguration. And I think part of it is because of the Israelis. They just don't want people protesting and giving them a bad look. I think that's what it's about.
Oh, yes. And don't forget that the Zionist lobby in Paris, particularly, is wow. They run the whole thing. It's very, very complex. Yes, of course. And anything that happens immediately is anti-Semitism. Whatever happens is anti-Semitism.
It's worse than in the Anglosphere. It really is. We've progressed in England and America more than they have in France, I have to say.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. In France, because Paris is also so provincial, everybody knows everybody else in Paris, and it's the seat of power, the seat of CEOs, etc. So everybody is there. You go to the same restaurants, the same brasseries, and everything. It's a very small amount of people. I would say a few tens of thousands would be an exaggeration. Let's say 20, 30,000 people who run the whole show.
Yeah.
In Paris and in the whole country. And they all know each other. And of course, they know that the rules are very strict because they know who's behind, really running the show.
Yeah, it's It's sad. It's sad because
It's sad.
there's
Very
no left
sad.
anymore. There's no direct action. I don't know. I feel like there's a crisis in the left and in the West. It's nothing like it used to be 100 years ago. And the French used to be a model for that, and now it's crumbled.
They used to be a model, and they became neoliberal, and that was their demise.
Yeah.
All across Europe, and especially in France, the old left now, they're all of them neoliberal, anti-working class, absolutely, and they ceased to be progressive, and they were completely incorporated by turbo neoliberalism. It's very, very, and this is replicated in Latin America. Is the same thing. It's the same.
I mean, they still do better than in England because obviously they were able to win an election. But we didn't talk about England. Just briefly, your thoughts on.
I miss London, Richard. Wow, but the London. I lived in a London that doesn't exist anymore, like in the 70s or 80s. This London is just a beautiful memory now.
Yeah.
So I stopped followed Britain when Liz Truss came to power. I said, no, that's it. That's it.
I think a cabbage is a limit for any of us, So yeah, we at least Assange was freed. That's the only good thing I can celebrate.
Well, that's the only good, exactly.
Thank God.
Well, this was there. That there was a lot of pressure by the British establishment because they didn't want to be part of this extradition horror story.
I mean,
because it will be responsible for facilitating the extradition to the US. So there was a lot of pressure from above. Look, we don't want, we have nothing to do with your show. Please keep us away from all that.
I think they just wanted to do, if there was any pressure, it was just because they just didn't want to look bad, not because they actually
because they didn't want to look bad. You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's that selfish, honestly. But I just kind of doing the tour of Europe there. I mean, it doesn't look like a West that's very equipped to deal with any challenges or any competition. And when I say competition, I don't mean the American idea of that everyone is a threat. I just mean actual, healthy competition. They just, I feel like it's all downhill from here. Do you feel that that's the way it's going?
I do, unfortunately, Richard. Well, I lived in Europe for a great deal of my life. I lived in London, Milan, and Paris, which let's say the golden trio. It's not. Obviously, nowadays, it's a dystopian reality in all three, right? Another thing, while we are speaking, probably, I think it's maybe it has already started. You know what they are discussing in Brussels today? The indefinite confiscation of those Russian assets.
Ah, yes, the grand theft, yeah.
Is the grand theft, which is I think in dollars is like 320 billion, more or less. It's a little less in euros now. And the craziest thing is that the proposal by the European Commission, by toxic von der Leyen, is this indefinite confiscation. And then they're going to start getting the interest to finance weaponizing of Ukraine. The thing is, the Europeans are going to pay the price, and in terms of dismantling the euro, among other things, and the lack of confidence from the global majority for an American plan. Because the Americans want to do that, but they said, look, the money is with you, Europeans, you do it. Basically saying, if there are any legal problems later on, it's on you, not on us. And those idiots in Brussels and the ministers of all the 27, they are buying this. It boggles the mind how suicidal they are. It's inexplicable. Okay, it is explicable because they are, of course, Trojan horses, fifth columnists, stupid, you name it. But it's inexplicable to anybody thinking rationally.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be some backlash from Russia, regarding this. I don't just think Russia. I think like the whole world is just going to look at that and say we're not doing business with you at all.
Can we put our investments in European banks? No, not anymore. So everybody's going to flee. So expect all these people, Deutsche Bank and company, to flounder big time.
Yeah, I think that's where it's headed. Pepe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. It was a pleasure.
As always, I'll just put your Twitter up on the screen so people can follow you. Where else shall they pursue your fine work?
You can put my X account. Yeah, this is VK, the one. Yeah. You can put VK, Telegram, and X.
Okay, understood. They'll all be in the.
I don't know. This is my X actually. You're right. This is my X.
I think this is your VK now.
Thank you. And you can add my Telegram account as well.
Okay, will do. Everything will be in the chat and description. Guys, please make sure you do follow Pepe. He is world class.
Fantastic.
World class. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear. Take care of yourself, huh?
Take care. Bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you very much, Pepe.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Everybody, that was Pepe Escobar. Again, world-class journalist. He's, one of the best on all things geostrategic, multipolar world, Eurasia, you name it. And I've done several interviews with him about BRICS, about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, about the Ukraine war. Everything is in a playlist. It's here on the channel. And again, please follow him on Twitter and everything. All his social media accounts, you can find them in the chat and the description. Thank you all again for tuning in. Thank you all for your support. Remember, they pulled the plug on the monetization for the channel, so please support independent media by making a contribution on PayPal